I'm Isabel Hartley, and I've spent the last 9 years of my life building something I thought was mine. Senior Strategy Consultant at Orion Strategies, a boutique brand development firm nestled in the heart of Chicago's financial district. 9 years of 60-hour weeks, crisis management, and turning Harvey Lennox's inherited mess into something that actually functioned. 9 years of believing that loyalty and expertise would eventually pay off. I was wrong. The conference room felt smaller than usual as I sat across from Harvey, watching him slide the annual review packet across the mahogany table with the casual indifference of someone who'd never had to fight for anything in his life. His father had built Orion from nothing, turning it into a respected name in brand strategy. Harvey had inherited it at 28, riding on reputation and connections he'd never earned. "Isabel," he said, not bothering to look up from his phone. "We need to discuss some changes to your compensation package." I'd been expecting a raise, maybe not a huge one, given the economic climate, but something that reflected my contributions. In the past year alone, I'd salvaged 3 major client relationships that were on the verge of collapse, brought in 4 new accounts worth over $2 million in annual revenue, and trained half the junior staff who kept this place running. The number on the page made me blink twice. 50%. He was cutting my salary in half. "There's been some restructuring," Harvey continued, finally setting his phone down, but still avoiding eye contact. "We're streamlining operations, focusing on efficiency. Your new role will be more focused." I stared at the document, my mind racing, not with panic, as Harvey probably expected, but with a crystalline clarity I hadn't felt in months. Because 3 weeks ago, Charlotte Royce had called me. Charlotte ran Catalyst Partners, a growing consultancy that was making waves in the industry. We'd crossed paths at conferences, maintained a professional friendship built on mutual respect. Her call had been casual, almost conversational. Would I be interested in discussing a partnership opportunity? The compensation would be significant, the work challenging, and the client base? Well, let's just say they were very interested in someone with my particular skill set and reputation. I told her I needed time to think about it. Loyalty, I'd said, professional obligations, all the things that good employees are supposed to feel. "When does this take effect?" I asked, my voice steady. Harvey looked surprised. He'd probably expected tears, or anger, or desperate negotiations. "Immediately. Your new contract is in the packet." I nodded, closing the folder. "I understand." The confusion on his face was almost comical. That's it? What else would there be?" I stood, smoothing my skirt. "You've made your position clear. I'll need some time to review the terms, of course." As I walked back to my office, I could feel Harvey's eyes following me. He'd expected a fight, and my calm acceptance had thrown him off balance. Good. Let him wonder. My office overlooked Michigan Avenue, and from the 15th floor, the city spread out like a circuit board of possibilities. I decorated it carefully over the years, professional but warm, with client testimonials framed on one wall and industry awards on another. Everything here told the story of someone who belonged, someone who'd earned her place. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Charlotte's number. "Isabel," she answered on the second ring. Perfect timing. I was just thinking about our conversation. "I've thought about it too," I said. "When can we meet?" There was a pause, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "How about tomorrow morning? I'll send you the address." After hanging up, I opened my laptop and began to do something I should have done years ago. I started documenting exactly what I brought to Orion Strategies. Not just my job description, but the real work, the relationships, the institutional knowledge, the invisible threads that held this place together. 85% of our annual revenue came from clients who'd specifically requested to work with me. When Meridian Pharmaceuticals had their FDA crisis last year, they'd called my direct line at 10 p.m. on a Sunday, bypassing Harvey entirely. When Blackstone Retail needed to rebuild their brand after the discrimination lawsuit, they'd made it clear that they'd only stay if I remained their lead strategist. Then there were the vendors. Mercury Press, our primary printing partner, had been on the verge of dropping us 2 years ago due to Harvey's tendency to approve jobs without understanding the technical requirements. I'd spent 3 months rebuilding that relationship, learning their processes, establishing clear communication protocols. Now their account manager, Maria Santos, texted me directly when rush jobs came up. Our IT systems, too. The CRM that tracked all our client interactions, project timelines, and vendor relationships. I'd designed the workflows, trained the staff, and maintained the data integrity. Harvey had never bothered to learn how it worked, delegating it entirely to me and assuming it would just continue. As I compiled this mental inventory, a pattern emerged that I'd been too close to see. I wasn't just an employee at Orion Strategies, I was the foundation. Remove me, and the entire structure would shift in ways Harvey couldn't possibly anticipate. My phone buzzed with a text from my colleague James Morrison, one of the senior account managers. Coffee tomorrow? Heard Harvey was in a mood after your meeting. James was sharp, ambitious, and one of the few people at Orion who actually understood the business beyond surface level. He'd probably sensed the shift in dynamics and wanted intel. I typed back, rain check, early meeting tomorrow. The next morning, Catalyst Partners' office in River North was everything Orion wasn't: modern, collaborative, buzzing with the energy of a team that actually enjoyed their work. Charlotte met me in the lobby, and her handshake was firm, confident. Isabel, thank you for coming. Let me show you around. The tour was impressive, but it was the conversation that followed that sealed my decision. Charlotte laid out her vision for expansion, the clients she was targeting, and the role she saw for a senior partner with my background. The financial package was generous, not just salary, but equity, profit sharing, and the kind of professional autonomy I'd been craving for years. I have one question, I said as we concluded our meeting. How quickly could I start? Charlotte's eyes lit up. How does Monday sound? I thought about Harvey's smug confidence, his assumption that I had no other options. Monday sounds perfect. That afternoon, I drafted my resignation letter. 2 weeks' notice, as professionally required. No drama, no accusations, just a simple statement of intent to pursue other opportunities. I'd learned long ago that the most powerful moves are often the quietest ones. The next morning, I placed the letter on Harvey's desk before he arrived. Then I returned to my office and began the delicate process of transition planning, client lists, project timelines, vendor contacts. Everything documented with the thoroughness that had made me indispensable in the first place. Harvey's reaction was predictable. "This is unprofessional," he said, barging into my office 20 minutes after discovering the letter. "You can't just leave in the middle of active projects." "I'm giving you 2 weeks," I replied calmly. "That's standard notice." "Standard notice for a receptionist? Maybe. You're a senior consultant. These clients expect continuity." I looked up from my computer, where I was methodically organizing files. "Then perhaps you should have considered that before cutting my salary in half." For a moment, Harvey's composure slipped. "Look, maybe we can discuss the compensation adjustment. There might be room for negotiation." "I'm sure there is," I said, "but I've already accepted another position." The color drained from his face. "Where?" "That's not really relevant to our transition planning, is it?" Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into the handover process with characteristic thoroughness. I created detailed client profiles, documented every ongoing project, and prepared comprehensive briefings for whoever would be taking over my accounts. On paper, it looked like the perfect transition. Reality, of course, was more complicated. The first crack appeared on my second to last day, when Patricia Hawkins from Meridian Pharmaceuticals called the main line asking for me. The receptionist transferred her to Harvey, who spent 15 minutes trying to answer questions about a regulatory strategy that he'd never been briefed on. Patricia hung up confused and called my direct line immediately after. "Isabel, I'm sorry to bother you, but I just spoke with Harvey about the FDA submission timeline, and I don't think he understood what I was asking. Could you clarify the next steps?" I explained the situation carefully, professionally. "Patricia, As I mentioned in my email last week, I'll be transitioning off your account at the end of this week. Harvey will be your primary contact going forward. But you didn't finish the regulatory roadmap, she said, and I could hear the concern in her voice. The submission is due in 6 weeks. I've documented everything in the project files. Harvey has access to all of it. There was a pause. Isabel, I need to ask directly. Do you think Harvey can handle this? Because if there are any delays with the FDA submission, we're looking at millions in lost revenue. This was the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Patricia wasn't just a client, she was someone I'd worked with for 3 years, someone who trusted my judgment implicitly. She was also asking me to endorse Harvey's ability to manage something that could make or break her company's quarterly numbers. Patricia, I said carefully, I've provided comprehensive documentation for all ongoing projects. The team at Orion has access to everything they need to continue serving you effectively. It wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement, and Patricia was too smart not to notice. I see, she said. Well, if you don't mind me asking, where are you going? Perhaps we could discuss transitioning our account to your new firm. I'm not actively soliciting clients, I replied. But if you'd like to discuss your options, you're certainly free to explore them. After hanging up, I sat quietly for a moment, processing what had just happened. I hadn't poached Patricia, hadn't even suggested she consider moving her business. But I also hadn't reassured her that Harvey could handle her account with the expertise she needed. The truth was, I didn't believe he could. Similar conversations happened throughout that week. David Chen from Blackstone Retail, confused about the status of their rebranding campaign. Maria Santos from Mercury Press, wondering why the print specifications for the Morrison Industries annual report weren't matching the creative brief. James Morrison himself, quietly asking if I thought the team could handle the workload once I left. Each conversation reinforced the same uncomfortable truth. I hadn't just been doing my job at Orion, I'd been doing Harvey's job, the operations manager's job, and half of the account management team's job. The clients came to me because I delivered results. The vendors worked with me because I understood their processes and paid attention to details. The staff relied on me because I'd taken the time to train them properly. Harvey had inherited a company built by his father's reputation and sustained by relationships I'd cultivated. Now he was about to discover what happened when those relationships walked out the door. My last day was a Friday. I cleaned out my desk methodically, returned my company laptop and access cards, and said goodbye to the colleagues I genuinely miss. Harvey was notably absent, having left early for what his assistant described as an important client meeting. I suspected he was avoiding the awkwardness of a final conversation. Fine by me. We'd said everything that needed saying when he'd slid that salary reduction across the conference table. As I walked out of the Orion building for the last time, my phone buzzed with a text message. Harvey? Finally. Good luck. You're replaceable. I looked at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Let him believe that. Monday morning at Catalyst Partners was everything I'd hoped for. Charlotte introduced me to the team as a full partner. My bio already updated on the company website. My business cards printed and waiting on my desk. The office energy was infectious. Smart people doing challenging work, collaborating instead of competing. My first week was spent getting oriented, understanding Catalyst's processes and client base, and beginning to develop strategy for the kinds of accounts we wanted to pursue. Charlotte was hands-on but not micromanaging, offering guidance while giving me the autonomy to shape my role. It was also the week that Orion's strategies began to unravel. The first domino fell on Tuesday, when Meridian Pharmaceuticals sent a formal letter terminating their contract. They cited concerns about continuity and expertise in their regulatory consulting needs. Harvey called me twice that day. I didn't answer. Wednesday brought news that Mercury Press had suspended services pending resolution of outstanding invoicing issues. Apparently, their billing system required specific project codes that only I had been using. And without me there to provide them, their automated processes had started rejecting Orion's print orders. By Thursday, 3 of our junior consultants had submitted their resignations. James Morrison was the first to reach out to me directly. Isabel, he said over coffee at a neutral location. I need to ask, is Catalyst hiring? We're always looking for talented people, I replied carefully. Why do you ask? Because Harvey's losing his mind. The Meridian situation has him panicked, and now Blackstone is asking questions about their project timeline. He's been in meetings all week trying to figure out how to cover your client load. But honestly, I don't think he realizes how much you were actually handling. I'd expected this conversation, but it still felt surreal. What exactly is happening? James ran his hands through his hair. Remember the CRM system you set up? The workflows and client interaction tracking? Harvey tried to access Patricia Hawkins's file yesterday and couldn't figure out how to pull up her project history. Turns out you'd customized the entire interface, and nobody else knew how to navigate it. There's documentation, I said. I left detailed instructions for everything. Sure, but documentation only helps if people actually read it. Harvey assumed he could just jump in and pick up where you left off. But he's discovering that there's a difference between knowing what needs to be done and actually knowing how to do it. The irony wasn't lost on me. Harvey had spent years dismissing my contributions as simply doing my job, never recognizing the institutional knowledge and relationship management that made that job possible. Now he was learning the hard way that expertise isn't transferable through memos. So what happens next? I asked. That's what I'm trying to figure out. I like working in strategy consulting, but I don't like working for someone who doesn't understand the business he inherited. Half the team is updating their resumes. I studied James carefully. He was competent, professional, and well-regarded by clients, the kind of person who could thrive in the right environment. If you're serious about exploring opportunities, send me your resume. I can't make any promises, but Charlotte's been talking about expanding our account management team. The relief on his face was visible. Thank you. Really, I was hoping you'd say that. Over the following weeks, the picture became clearer. Harvey had made two critical miscalculations. First, he'd assumed that cutting my salary would force me to accept a diminished role while continuing to deliver the same results. Second, he'd believed that client relationships belonged to Orion Strategies, not to the individual consultants who'd built and maintained them. Both assumptions proved spectacularly wrong. Meridian's departure was just the beginning. Blackstone Retail followed within 2 weeks, citing concerns about project continuity. They didn't immediately sign with Catalyst. I was careful not to actively solicit them. But when they reached out to explore options, I was happy to discuss how we might serve their needs. The vendor relationships collapsed even faster. Mercury Press, after resolving their billing issues, quietly began steering new clients toward other consultancies. Their account manager, Maria Santos, mentioned in passing that they'd been impressed by the professionalism and attention to detail they'd experienced working with me, and wondered if Catalyst might be interested in exploring a preferred partnership arrangement. The talent exodus from Orion was more gradual but equally devastating. James was the first to join Catalyst, but he wasn't the last. Sarah Kim, one of their best junior consultants, came aboard a month later. Then Michael Torres, their creative director, followed by Alexandra Wright from their research team. I didn't recruit any of them aggressively. I didn't need to. Harvey's management style, or lack thereof, was doing that work for me. When talented people feel undervalued and see no path forward, they start looking for alternatives. When those alternatives include working with someone they respect at a company that's growing and thriving, the choice becomes obvious. Meanwhile, Harvey's attempts to stabilize Orion grew increasingly desperate. He hired an expensive consulting firm to audit their operations and recommend improvements. The irony of paying outsiders to explain his own business wasn't lost on those of us watching from the outside. He also tried to implement new systems and processes, but without understanding why the old ones had worked or how they'd been customized over years of practical use. Client confusion and vendor frustration multiplied. The breaking point came 3 months after I'd left, at the annual Brand Strategy Forum, the industry's premier networking event. It was the kind of gathering where deals were discussed, partnerships formed, and reputations made or broken. I was there representing Catalyst, energized by our growing client base and the quality of work we were producing. Our booth was busy, our presentations well attended, and Charlotte was practically glowing as she introduced me to potential clients and strategic partners. Harvey was there too, of course, working the room with the desperate energy of someone trying to project confidence he didn't feel. Orion's booth looked tired by comparison, their materials outdated, their teams smaller than in previous years. The confrontation I'd been expecting finally happened on the second day of the conference, at a networking reception hosted by the American Marketing Association. I was in conversation with the CMO of Titan Industries, a major manufacturing company that was exploring a comprehensive brand refresh, when Harvey approached. "Isabel," he said, his voice carrying just enough volume to interrupt our conversation. "I've been hoping to catch up with you." I turned, noting the slightly forced smile and the tension around his eyes. "Harvey, how are you?" "Doing well. Thanks." Building on the foundation we established at Orion, he extended his hand to the CMO. "Harvey Lennox, Orion Strategies. We've done some excellent work in the manufacturing sector." The CMO, Robert Chen, shook Harvey's hand politely but turned back to me. Isabel was just explaining their approach to stakeholder alignment during brand transitions. Very comprehensive. Harvey's smile tightened. "Yes. Well, we developed that methodology during Isabel's time with us. She learned a lot working at Orion. It was a transparent attempt to claim credit for expertise I'd developed independently, and Robert seemed to recognize it as such." The conversation grew awkward quickly, and he excused himself with promises to follow up with me directly. Once we were alone, Harvey's facade dropped. "We need to talk," he said. "About what?" "About the clients you've taken, about the staff you've poached, about the damage you've done to relationships I spent years building." I looked at him with genuine curiosity. "Harvey, what clients have I taken? What staff have I poached?" "Don't play dumb. Isabel. Meridian, Blackstone, Morrison Industries. All accounts you developed at Orion, now doing business with your new firm." "Clients make their own decisions about who to work with," I replied. "I haven't violated any agreements or engaged in any unethical behavior. Can you say the same?" His face flushed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means cutting an employee's salary in half and expecting them to maintain the same performance isn't exactly a sound business strategy." For a moment, I thought he might lose his temper entirely. Instead, he leaned closer and lowered his voice. "Look, maybe I made some mistakes. Maybe we can work something out. There's room for negotiation here." "Negotiation about what?" "A partnership, Catalyst and Orion, working together. You bring the client relationships. I bring the infrastructure and established reputation. We could both benefit." It was almost comical. The same man who'd told me I was replaceable now suggesting we become partners. But there was something else in his expression, something that looked almost like fear. "That's an interesting proposal," I said. "But I'm not interested in looking backward. I'm focused on building something new. Something that's built on relationships you developed while working for me," he said, the desperation creeping into his voice. "Harvey," I said quietly, "I didn't take anything from you. I built relationships based on trust, expertise, and results. Those relationships exist because of who I am and how I work, not because of where I worked. You never owned them, which means I couldn't steal them." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him processing the implications of what I'd said. Orion's client base, vendor relationships, and institutional knowledge hadn't been assets that belonged to the company. They'd been the natural result of one person's professional approach and competence. Remove that person, and the relationships went with her. "This isn't over," he said finally. "No." I agreed. "But it's not about you anymore." I walked away from that conversation with a clarity I hadn't expected. For 9 years, I'd worked to build Harvey's vision of success, accepting that my contributions would be credited to the company rather than to me personally. I'd told myself that loyalty and dedication would eventually be rewarded, that good work would speak for itself. But good work only speaks for itself if someone's listening. Harvey had never really listened, not to me, not to clients, not to the market signals that might have helped him understand why his company was successful. He'd inherited a business built on his father's reputation and sustained by my relationships. And he'd assumed that combination would last forever. Now he was discovering what happened when reputation had to stand on its own merits. 6 months after leaving Orion, I was in my office at Catalyst Partners, reviewing proposals for 3 major new clients, when Charlotte knocked on my door frame. "Got a minute?" she asked. "I wanted to update you on the Morrison Industries situation." Morrison Industries had been one of Orion's largest accounts, a family-owned company that had been working with Harvey's father since the 1990s. Their current CEO, Patricia Morrison, had reached out to Catalyst the previous week, interested in discussing a potential brand evolution project. "What did she say?" I asked. "She wants to set up a formal presentation. Apparently, they've been dissatisfied with their current consulting relationship and are looking for someone who can provide more strategic depth." Charlotte paused. "She specifically mentioned your work on the Blackstone project. Word travels fast in this industry." I nodded, unsurprised. Morrison Industries represented exactly the kind of long-term, relationship-based client that Orion had built its reputation on. If they were considering a change, it suggested that Harvey's problems ran deeper than I'd realized. "When does she want to meet?" "Next Friday. She's bringing her marketing director and head of operations. This could be a significant win for us." After Charlotte left, I sat quietly for a moment, looking out at the Chicago skyline. 18 months ago. I'd been in a different office 15 blocks away, believing that hard work and loyalty would eventually pay off. I'd built something valuable there, but I'd built it for someone else's benefit. Now I was building again, but this time the foundation was mine. The clients who chose to work with Catalyst weren't just buying our services, they were investing in relationships they'd developed over years of professional interaction. The team members who'd joined us weren't just changing jobs. They were betting on their own potential in an environment that recognized and rewarded their contributions. Harvey had been right about one thing. I had taken something from Orion. But it wasn't clients or staff or trade secrets. I'd taken the lesson that expertise and relationships are personal assets, not corporate ones. That trust, once earned, belongs to the person who earned it. That the most powerful revenge isn't destruction, it's building something better. My phone buzzed with a text from James Morrison, who was preparing for the presentation to Morrison Industries. "Quick question about their competitive landscape. Do you have 5 minutes to walk through the key players?" I smiled and typed back, "Of course, my office or yours." This was what success felt like. Not just the growing client base or the expanding team or the financial rewards, though all of those were gratifying. Success was being surrounded by people who chose to work with you, who valued your expertise, who trusted your judgment enough to bet their own careers on your vision. Harvey had asked me once, in that final confrontation at the conference, about the damage I'd done to relationships he'd spent years building. But he'd never built those relationships. He'd inherited them, managed them, taken credit for them. When the person who'd actually built them left, they left too. That wasn't revenge. That was just gravity. As I walked down the hall to James's office, past the busy conference rooms where our team was working on strategies for clients who'd specifically chosen to work with us, I thought about Harvey's final text message. "You're replaceable." Maybe he was right. In a narrow sense, someone else could sit in my old office, answer client calls, manage vendor relationships. But they couldn't replicate the trust that had been built through years of consistent performance. The institutional knowledge that came from solving problems nobody else had anticipated. Or the professional relationships that existed because of who I was, not just what I did. Those things weren't replaceable because they'd never belonged to Orion Strategies in the first place. They'd belonged to me. And I'd simply been generous enough to share them with Harvey's company for 9 years. Now I was sharing them with Charlotte's company. But the difference was that Charlotte understood what she was getting. She valued expertise, rewarded results, and treated relationships as the strategic assets they actually were. Some lessons, apparently, have to be learned the hard way. Harvey was learning his, I was living mine. The Morrison Industries presentation went exactly as I'd expected. Patricia Morrison and her team were professional, thorough, and clearly impressed by our strategic approach and industry knowledge. They asked detailed questions about our methodology, our team's experience, and our understanding of their competitive challenges. At the end of the presentation, Patricia smiled and said, "This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we've been looking for. When can we get started?" Charlotte and I exchanged glances. Another major account, another vote of confidence in what we were building together. That evening, as I was packing up to leave the office, I noticed a missed call from an unknown number. The voicemail was brief. "Isabel, this is Harvey. I think we got off on the wrong foot last time we spoke. I'd like to discuss some opportunities for collaboration. Call me back when you get a chance." I listened to the message twice, then deleted it. Some bridges, once burned, aren't worth rebuilding. Some relationships, once broken by arrogance and short-sightedness, can't be repaired with phone calls and vague mentions of collaboration. I'd spent 9 years of my career building Harvey's vision of success. Now I was building my own. And it was everything I'd hoped it could be: professional, rewarding, built on foundations that belonged to me. Outside my office window, Chicago glittered in the evening light. Somewhere across the city, Harvey was probably in his office too, trying to figure out how to stop the slow hemorrhaging of clients and talent that had started the day he'd decided I was replaceable. I picked up my things and headed for the elevator, already thinking about tomorrow's challenges. New clients to serve, new strategies to develop, new relationships to build. The future was full of possibilities. And for the first time in years, they were all mine to explore. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I descended toward the lobby, toward the evening, toward whatever came next. Behind me, the lights of Catalyst Partners continued to glow, marking another day of work done well, relationships honored, and promises kept. Some victories aren't won through confrontation or destruction. Sometimes the most complete victory is simply building something better and walking away from what no longer serves you. Sometimes the best revenge is no revenge at all, just success. Earned honestly, shared generously, and built to last. I pushed through the lobby doors into the Chicago evening, breathing in the city air, and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new possibilities to explore. And for the first time in almost a decade, they would all be mine to pursue on my own terms. The satisfaction was deeper and more lasting than any revenge could have been. Because I hadn't destroyed Harvey's business, I'd simply stopped propping it up. The difference was everything.